So let's go through the syntax, gives you some background information on the sample, and also just help you understand a little bit more how psychologists will take surveys like what you took on Qualtrics and get them into numbers, the numbers that we need for quantitative analyses using statistics. So first, let me show you some basic demographics about our data set. So demographics are just variables that help to describe the population. So things like age, gender, if you plan to graduate. So I've highlighted this and I'm going to go ahead and run it. And you can't tell very easily, but there are three screens that we're going to be going back and forth between. We have our syntax screen, our output screen, and then there's also the data screen. So you'll mainly be looking at the output and syntax screen for the purposes of this video. So what you see here is that's your sample size. That's how many people have taken the survey. And we have 106 who took the age question. 11 people opted out. We have missing data for 11. Now there are only about 35 people in every class, but I've been using this survey for multiple classes. And this will help provide a better representation because we have to think, how does our sample represent our population? And we would need a higher sample size to have a good representation of our population. But we also need to think, well, who do we represent? This is a slightly biased sample in that you are somebody who elected to take health psychology. You're also a student at UNF. So who does this population represent? It represents people at UNF who are taking an online health psychology course. So if we wanted to get a broader population at UNF, we might do an intro to psychology course. We're going to have more people do some kind of freshman level course that everybody takes. So we have to just keep in mind how our sample might be slightly biased by the people who are taking it. So this gives us the measures of central tendency for our different variables, the mean, median, and mode. And as you remember from statistics, if your mean, median, mode are about the same, then you likely have a normal distribution. So we see here with age, our average age is around 23 and a half, and our median age and the mode, the one that the most people answered at 22, they're all about the same. So this is approximately normal. The frequency tables below for each of these variables provides you how many people answered for each option. So we see for age, people answered between 18 and 45, and we see that the majority were right here around the mean, median, and mode, which makes sense. We see that the majority of people who took this survey are female, that we have a lot of seniors, which is what I would expect in this 4,000 level course, but we have some juniors and sophomores. We have a portion who are graduating this semester. Congratulations to those. We have a nice sample who have plans after they graduate. This is the range for how many hours people are taking at UNF. Now keep in mind that this is a summer course, but I also have data from the spring course, and so we likely are going to see that there's more hours from people who were reporting in the spring course. How many classes are you taking? Same thing. We're probably going to see our summer people around here and the spring people talking about taking more classes this semester. How many hours do you work outside on average? So 27 people in our sample don't have a job outside of school. We see that we have a nice portion that work part-time, but a good amount of hours. And we have, so these people right here, so somewhere around 20 people who are working full-time. What's your relationship status? So we have it about equal between people who are single and people who are in a relationship. Now let me show you some syntax that will help to create this variable with 3 categories into a variable with 2 categories, because we'll be using some very basic statistics, correlations, and t-tests. And for t-tests, we want to compare 2 groups. And so there are 2 variables that have different categories that I want to collapse down, so they're just 2 categories. So let's go back to our syntax view and I'll show you what I do with that. For these, for both relationship status and for your class rank, I'm collapsing it down into a dichotomy, so having two different choices. So here I'm just saying if a relationship status was single in the variable named status, then make a new variable called distat, so that's dichotomy status, and keep it at single. But if in the relationship status variable people said that they were married or they were in a relationship, go ahead and collapse that down in the new variable and call it together. Same thing, I've collapsed the sophomores and juniors into one, so we have seniors versus lower level students. Okay, so you have what you need now for your write-up to, you can look through this output to sort of explain what the sample looks like. Now I want to show you how we get the measures into meaningful numbers. So let's go back to our syntax. And let me walk you through some things. So this is a life orientation test. This is a test that we use for optimism. And there are two cool things that are representative of ways that psychology are trying to be sure that that measures are valid, that they're testing what we think they're testing. So one thing that you see is that we have reverse coding. And that means that some of the answers, when you answered them, you ask questions that would tell how optimistic you are, and others would tell how pessimistic you are. And one of the reasons that we do that is you've probably been answering a survey and you just start answering the same number all the way down. So you just start circling all the way down the right side because you know that every question is answered the same way, and you quit reading. And so this is basically trying to keep people honest. So we can ask one question where an answer of 4 or strongly agree means that you're very optimistic, and another question where an answer of 0 or strongly disagree means you're very optimistic. And for those where a lower score it denotes that you're optimistic, that's when we reverse score. So when we make our sum score right here, we're summing up all your items, we want to be sure that for every item that a higher score is representative of a more optimistic outlook. So I've already run this, but basically we just highlight and press the green arrow, and then that creates a new variable in our data set. So if we go to the variable view, you see that here are the variables that we created for the reverse coded, and then this is the sum score. And I've run that for all of our measures. So let me quickly go through and just walk you through those. I'm hoping that this provides you a better understanding of how we measure things in psychology, because many people don't see how this is very scientifically grounded. These measures, somebody took a very long time and used a bunch of statistical approaches to be sure that they were valid and reliable. We aren't just making up questions on the spot to try to tap into people's feelings and psychosocial functioning. So next we have a coping humor scale, because that's one of our hypotheses. We have a ways of coping, and this has 8 subscales. So you answered, I think there were 68 questions, and different questions combine to represent a type of coping. So we have confrontive coping, distancing, self-controlling, seeking social support, accepting responsibility, escape avoidance, planful problem solving, and positive reappraisal. Now, not all of these coping styles are necessarily good. So when you are looking at your analyses or looking at your hypotheses and writing them up, go back and look at the items and see how these different items, so for example, items 20, 56, 60, 38, 36, 30, and 23, how they come together, what they sound like to represent positive reappraisal. Because some of the coping item or coping subscales, the name of it sounds good, but when you look at the items, you realize that it's not a really great way for people to cope. We have our perceived stress questionnaire and our undergraduate stress questionnaire. Now, just a reminder that perceived stress is a person's perception of how much stress they're going through. And some people have a really great assessment of how much stress they're going through. Some people underestimate it, some people overestimate it, but we need to hear what's your perception, because that could have important implications for how it's impacting your life. The undergraduate stress questionnaire is actually how many stressors you're going through at any given time. So we would expect these to be correlated, that if you had more stressors, your perception would be higher. But then we know there are also some people who might have a lot of things going on but don't perceive it. There might be you might have some classmates who have fewer things going on, but they have a much higher perception of how much stress is in their life. And then finally, critical, because this is health psychology, I gave you a measure that sort of gave you a health checklist to see what physical symptoms you're showing, where higher scores mean that you have more physical symptoms experienced at a greater severity. So that gives you a rundown. And now I'm going to stop this video and do another one that covers all the hypotheses.